Welcome to the PrimeSpan Podcast, where we talk about aging, mental health, and living well in the years that matters the most. Each week, we cut through the noise to focus on what actually helps you feel clearer, steadier, and more in control as you age. If you're navigating the second half of life or thinking ahead, you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
Many people go through life assuming things will stay the way they are. We assume we'll always have more time, more energy, more health, more chances to prepare. But there are moments in life that change how we see everything. Sometimes it's aging, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's stress, and sometimes it's when someone you love in a role where sacrifice and uncertainty are real every day. When that happens, your perspective changes. You think differently about time. You think differently about family. You think differently about responsibility. Today, we are joined by Angela Nelson, who brings that perspective both personally and as a mother of a veteran, and professionally through her work helping individuals and families make real-life decisions about planning, finances, and stability. Angela, welcome to our podcast.
Good to be here, Adam.
Thank you for being here. I have a first question for you. When you hear the title, "What Life Teaches You When Someone You Love Serves," what comes to mind first?
From my personal experience, I'm a military mom, and I have military mom 1.0, and I have military mom 2.0 and military mom 3.0. 1.0 is when my oldest son went away to fight in the Iraq War. He was an Army veteran, and he became disabled when he was over there. And eventually he did pass away in 2012 as a result of his injuries. So I experienced that, and actually having a son on the front line and having that anxiety and that worry. And he didn't die on the front line. He died at home in his bed, but it wasn't a sudden thing. It was a long thing. And then my other two sons are Marines. Well, the second to the youngest is serving. Of course, I have a lot of anxiety about him possibly having to go to Iran. And my youngest son, he served 4 years, and he's out now. So I have several experiences that I can relate to military moms in a lot of different ways. So, and I'm also connected to a lot of military, like Gold Star families through the different communities that I'm in. But I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, that's what I think about.
You know, Allyson and I are excited to have you here. And you mentioned about the upcoming this war that we are in right now. I'm sure a lot of our listeners who have families that are being deployed. Actually, I was talking to another mom who has a son who's actually Navy SEAL. Is being deployed in Iran this week. It's a stressful moment to a lot of veteran parents. So, well, Angela, tell us a little bit about your background. You and I and Allyson and I attended one of your networking events. I think it's good for our audience to know a little bit about your background, what led you into your work that you do now, and we'll talk a little bit more about the veterans, what you're doing with the veterans later. But I think it's good for our audience to know what are you doing and a little bit more about your background.
Okay. Yeah. So my business is Starship Solutions. That's why I've got the space behind me here. But I help families. I teach families how money works. And I also help families prepare for their financial future and for their future in general. I'm also a Legal Shield associate. And but what kind of got me into doing all these things is when I went through a divorce. Not long before my divorce, I had moved my elderly mother in with me, and she was starting to having the beginnings of dementia, and she needed full-time care. And so I started my own business as an entrepreneur. I had a company that I worked with doing credit repair. In doing the credit repair, I saw that like 99 times out of 100 of my clients, they had credit issues because of some kind of tragedy that they had dealt with in their life. It was either because of a divorce or an illness or a death in the family or a loss of a job. Like there's just so many things that can lead to financial hardship. And, a lot of these people made great money too. They just, have ran into credit issues. So I started doing networking when I started that business and started meeting a lot of really cool people all over the country. And also that's around the time I added Legal Shield as a service for my credit repair clients. Well, so I was working from home, taking care of my mom, who was also a veteran. My dad, who was also a veteran, had passed away several years before, so she didn't have him to take care of her. And it was around this time that my second to the youngest son graduated high school. Well, he came home from high school one day and said, "Mom, I think I know what I want to do." And he said, "I'm going to join the Marines when I get out of the military." And so that's where 2.0 came in. And so I had these two different areas. Like I had taken care of my elderly mom, and I had worrying about a kid who was becoming a Marine, and I was networking. And so I ended up starting a networking group that kind of pulled that all together for me. Well, at the time it was called something different. We moved the platform over to Alignable. We're also on Facebook, and people can just join us with our Zoom link. But we meet on Mondays at 3:00, and we've been doing this since 2021. I believe, and it was right in the middle of COVID too. And people were not able to go to in-person networking meetings. And so the name of the networking meeting was All Stars and Stripes Heroes Connection. And because I look at military and veterans, and as for military veterans, first responders, their families, or anybody who wants to do business to business networking with us. And it was really a great community for me. It was a lot of support. I could ask people, I was letting people know kind of what was going on. When my son went to Japan, when another one went to Egypt, the second to the youngest he was in Puerto Rico. So, when those kind of things happen, it's kind of nice to have a community of people that are also entrepreneurs, who are veterans, and who know me as a friend. As a matter of fact, in 2021, no, I started the networking group in 2020. That's right. Well, in 2021, I ended up having to have open heart surgery to replace my mitral valve. It was kind of a birth defect that they had never caught. I had such an outpouring from that group. I mean, people were sending me from like across the country. People were sending me food and cards and blankets and flowers. And so it was pretty awesome. But yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up getting into being an entrepreneur. Well, I do have to preface it with this. I had been in the heavy equipment business with my ex-husband for like 23 years. And the combination of having been an entrepreneur for 23 years and also needing to be home to care for my mom, it was just a perfect transition for me. That's kind of a little bit of my background.
You have a very rich background when you view it. One of my curiosity is, how did your experience as a veteran's mom change your perspective when it comes to what you have been doing? Has that impacted how you do your business, how you interact with many people?
Oh, definitely. Because especially with, first of all, with this veteran community and the networking people that I network with, to just really appreciate their service and what they did do, and for families as well, and to be able to support other families. So that would be one way. Also, I look for ways in particular to help veterans with the services that I do. Like I'm building a team with the financial services side of the financial education side of my business that I do now. And, I look for young military people who are coming out that are looking to transition into a new career. And we have like a skills bridge program and things, so like my radar is out there for military families and veterans, and also first responders. I kind of included that when we started the group because it was right in the height of COVID, and it kind of felt like with the pandemic and everything that was going on in the hospitals and all that, it was like the front lines were right here in our own country, the nurses and all the first responders. So I included that. Well, also too, in 2012, about 6 months before my oldest son passed away, my ex-husband and my kids and I, he was, of course, not, my oldest son wasn't there, but the rest of my kids were. We had a house fire. We lived in Tennessee, and our house burned. It was like a 6,000 square foot house, burned down in the middle of the night. We got out like in our bare feet and pajamas, and the first responders that came out to help us, it was just, they were like angels. We were like at our lowest point, and they came out. And the other thing too is that a lot of the veterans that I've met a lot of them end up becoming first responders. They go into police work or becoming firefighters and that sort of thing.
This is why when you and I were talking about this, I was sharing with you that you see things and how your act of service when it comes to giving back to the people that's serving our country is really coming from a deeper level. I rarely use the term mission, but it's the way we see things as you're describing, giving back to the military, the serviceman. It's coming back from a mission level perspective, and you can sense that because I think it's because of what you've experienced in life, but also your family. You're surrounded by it, from parents to kids. Did it ever come to your mind to also join the service?
So, well,
By that
it didn't, and the reason is because my oldest sister, not my oldest sister, my second to the oldest sister, my middle sister, she actually went in the Air Force. And so, yeah, it seemed like that would be the thing to do, was go in the military when I was young. But I actually got married between my sophomore and junior year of high school, and had my son my oldest son right after I had turned 17. And the thought of leaving him behind, I just couldn't do that. And so I did finish high school, and I actually went on out of high school. I went into this printed circuit board designer training program that Texas Instruments had. And I went to school during the day, I worked during the day and went to school at night. So I barely got to see my son, the first couple years of his life, because I was just trying to make the best person I could be for him, to be his mom. Mm-hmm. I kept thinking, well, there's no guarantee in life that I'm going to have somebody to take care of us. I need to be able to take care of him.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I did actually end up, I ended up staying home with him after he was about 3 years old. So I worked for Texas Instruments for 3 years, and then I just missed him so bad. And I thought, well, I've got this career I can fall back on now. Now I want to stay home with him. And I ended up homeschooling him. And during that time, his dad, who I had married when I was 16, he got sick and he died when my oldest son was 10 and my oldest daughter was 4. And so I didn't go back into printed circuit board design, but I had the skills that I had learned and that I was able to, then continue on. So that's carried me throughout my life. But no, the military would have been good for me because I am so fly by the seat of my pants. I could have really used that structure. And but I do think that my parents, having been military veterans, they were like, now I'm not an early bird, but they were always early birds. They demonstrated a lot of really good self-discipline type qualities, and they were patriotic, not overly so, but they were always, the answer to any young person's problems was join the military. And that's why my son went in. Actually, my oldest son, he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, and was going through a little bit of a, just trying to figure things out, and wanted to go to college, and he knew they would pay for it. Well, of course, September 11th happened,
Yes.
In 2001. And I think that also was a huge factor for him going in the military. I don't have the years down exactly right, but it was like a couple years after we got into the Iraq War. Yeah, from the get-go when he went in, I was worried. I have 5 sons and 2 daughters. And girls nowadays can go be on the front lines too.
Correct.
It's always been in the back of my mind ever since my son was a baby. I remember I would sit and hold him and rock him and look at him and think, there's no way this baby would grow up and be like a soldier. You have a son, so you know what I'm talking about. You just look at them. And I didn't get to go to his graduation when my second to youngest went in the Marines, and my mom was living with me and everything. Our whole family went out to California for his graduation. And I was so proud, to be able to be there in the stands watching him marching out there and everything. But I looked out on all those guys walking in line, everybody, in perfect step with each other and everything. But I looked out, all I saw was his face. It was a sea of little boys. Like, wait a minute. I don't remember this growing up, that you'd watch these war movies and stuff, and they always look like grown older men.
But they're really young when you think about when they graduate when they finish training, they're actually very young.
They're very young. Yeah. And and my son, of course, my boys are really tall, and he's 6'2", I believe. So he really stood tall, but most of the others were more regular height, and they just look so young. And I think that's the thing, when people watch the news and they see the things that are going on and the decisions that are made in different conflicts around the world and all, it's so important that we be in prayer for these people and for their families, because these are somebody's little kids that just have grown up and they're trained. Like my son, I was talking to him last night about, wondering if he's going to end up having to go to Iran. Thankfully, he would never probably be front lines, because he's a C-130 aircraft mechanic. But at the same time, we just did a memorial thing at the networking meeting on Monday about the 6 airmen that died in the C-130. I think it's
the fuel
135. When they were fueling the aircraft. And a lot of times he goes up in those airplanes because he's a mechanic, so he'll follow them, in case they need a tire goes flat or, something happens up in the air. And so, but I was talking to him last night about, wondering if he's going to have to go over there or not, because he just got back from Puerto Rico not long ago. And talking about, whether we should be in this conflict and all of that, not to get into politics or anything, but And he's like, well, he's like, Mom, this is all I care about is I mean, am I going to get to do my job?
Mhm.
Like, am I going to get to go and do what I was trained for, what I was prepared for? And, that seriously, he's just, to me, that's being a hero, just being ready to go out there and do whatever he has to do for our country. Because he could be doing really well, making good money in the civilian
Correct.
sector. And he was in for 5 years. And so he went in 2020. No, yeah, I think he went in 2020, if I recall correctly. I get the years mixed up. But anyways, he went in, and then a year later, his brother graduated and went in a year after. Well, he went in for 5 years, the older one. And the youngest one, he went in for 4. So they were supposed to be getting out at the same time. This was a couple years ago. And the younger one got out, but he re-enlisted. So he could have been out by now,
Yeah.
but he's like voluntarily stayed in. So I'm
Go
super proud.
ahead, Allyson. You have a question.
Thank you for sharing those stories and being, so open to sharing about your family, Angela. As a mom, how do you kind of manage all of those stressors, knowing those are your kids on the front line, and that's so admirable to look at them as heroes. How do you kind of deal with those things daily? Just sharing the conversation about not knowing if your son's going to have to go and serve, and how do you manage that?
I found out when I had my open heart surgery that the way that I deal with things, when how I dealt with our house fire, my son passing away, and then like about 6 months later, my best friend was also killed in fire, and then all these tragedies happened in my life, and I just get to work. Like, I work really hard. Well, when I had my and then of course was going through my divorce and everything. Well, when I had my open heart surgery, I was like, I couldn't do anything. And just to move, I was in so much pain. And so I didn't have the energy to work and do things. And so I ended up actually having to go to therapy for a little while, because I realized I hadn't dealt with things. I had just like shoved everything aside and just got really, really busy. And so when I catch myself doing that, I try to talk to somebody. Of course, having 6 children now, I have my other children who are all grown adults. We talk, I can lean on them when I need to. And that's also why I try to be part of other communities of like Gold Star families. I don't consider myself a Gold Star family, because most of the time those are people who are actually, even though he collapsed when he was in Iraq, he was not in combat when it happened, but it was kind of the beginning of a downward spiral for him. I look at other families and what they're going through, and I just try to realize I don't have it as bad as I think I do sometimes. And I just try to focus on my family. I focus on my kids. I focus on the things that I can change.
I have one follow-up question that I wanted to ask. Your son, who just went back from Puerto Rico and who is potentially going to Iran, he's basically at the front lines of the 2 most recent regional wars. And Allyson just asked you about how you feel, but that's very close to the fire. I'm sure he tells you that he's going somewhere, or maybe does he tell you, first off, does he tell you when he's getting deployed immediately, or does he tell you?
Allowed to. There is a thing called OPSEC. It's operational security. And so if I knew right now he was going a certain place, like, I wouldn't say, because it's not, I learned that there's like certain guidelines that as a military family you have to follow. But he was in Japan for several years. He loved it over there. And the whole time he was there, I was just worried because there was all this talk about stuff going on between Taiwan and China. And I was just like, oh, I just want you back here. I want you back in the States. And no sooner does he get back in the States, in North Carolina, and he calls me and he's like, I'm going to Puerto Rico. and I'm like, and all this, hearing all this stuff going on with Venezuela. And I'm like, I should have just, we have no idea like where they are the safest.
Yeah.
Because I remember when like September 11th happened, not long before that, my ex-husband flipped a forklift off of a trailer. He was unloading it, and I had just gotten home from the hospital with my youngest son, and I hear this horrible boom outside, and I go out and I look, and he had just completely flipped it upside down, and he ended up, we thought he broke his back. He didn't, thank God. But my daughter, my oldest daughter was like, oh, I just wish he did something where he just worked in an office, where we didn't have to, worry about his safety. And then September 11th happened, and she said, wow, here all these people were sitting in an office, thought they had a nice, cushy, safe job, and an airplane flies into their buildings. So we don't know where we're safe. Oh, it just came to me. So what I was trying to say earlier is that we can't control. There's a lot of things that we cannot control. But the only thing that we can somewhat try to learn how to control is our thoughts and our mind,
right,
and what we dwell on or what we think about. And worrying doesn't do any good. So I really try, I act like I'm, some Vulcan here, if you know the Star Trek reference, but I'm, definitely more of the emotional type, and it's hard not to worry, but I have learned that worrying does not make a difference. It does not make anything change. And if we were able to move all the pieces to where we would think everything would be just perfect, it isn't necessarily. I knew this man not long after my son died. He was a mechanic working on a vehicle for us. And he told us, he's like, yeah, I heard about your son, because the community we lived in, we had a business where kind of everybody knew us, and it was another business besides the equipment business. And anyway, so he was talking to us, and he opened up and told us his story. His son had done like 3 tours in Afghanistan, I believe it was, or no, it was 3 tours of Iraq or Afghanistan. No, I think it was Afghanistan. Anyways, he had come back, and he was on what they call terminal leave. So he was basically done serving, and he had all this time accrued, like off time. And so he was still officially considered in the military, but was done serving. And he was, I believe, down in Florida, and he got killed in a hit and run accident by a drunk driver. And so, here he thought, okay, my son is home. He's safe. He's okay, and then he gets killed. So we just don't know. When my son died, he was home in bed, and the detective told me afterwards that when they found him, he was laying back in his bed. He had the TV on, and he was just kind of propped up with pillows, and he had a Coke in one hand and a beef jerky in the other. And believe it or not, that gave me so much comfort to know that when he died, he basically, they said it was an accidental overdose of prescription medications that he was on. He had just gotten out of the hospital, and I think it was probably a new doctor prescribed something that didn't combine with what he was already taking or something. But for about a month, we didn't know if it was on purpose or if it was more of an accidental thing. And they ended up ruling that it was an accidental overdose. There was no suicide note or anything like that. But I will say too that I run into a lot of families who are survivors of, veteran suicide and military suicide. And having that 1 month of even the thought that that's what had happened. I mean, and he had struggled with PTSD and he had suicidal thoughts in the past. So it would not have been outside the realm of possibility. But, that in itself is a huge thing too, that parents go through. And it's sad, like I said, with the credit repair and all that, there's like so much of it is tragedies. There's a lot of hurting families out there going through divorce and going through health issues and financial issues and all of those things. And what happens is these young people, they're growing up in our families that are dysfunctional. And I say our families because, I will say my ex-husband, it was an abusive marriage for 23 years. And so I'm sure there was a lot of that that my son was dealing with as well. When he went in, well, one of the things I've found out through talking to people is that when young people go in the military, and their parents think too, this is going to fix all of their problems. And then they go in the military and they can't talk about their emotional struggles because if they do, then they get labeled and then they can't, they want to shoot guns. They want to have guns, and maybe they're not suicidal, but they want to be able to, to protect themselves, and so they're afraid to talk about it and get labeled or get kicked out of the military. If I'm able to have a networking meeting where people can come and be able to meet other people that they can talk to about these things, I'm happy to be a part of that because of my experiences.
Angela, this is more common than what we know, I'm sure, right? As a veteran mom, I'm assuming that is what I'm sensing is there's a lot of that is happening, that more support should be provided to people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. That's one of the first spotlight speakers that we had at our first meeting when I opened it up through Alignable was a gentleman who has a service for veteran suicide. We've had a lot of those speakers that we've had have been people who've actually, we have one gentleman who talked about how it was just the fact that there was an attempt that was made and it was an unsuccessful attempt. And that is where his life turned around. I've heard that story on 2 different occasions. And so to be able to learn from those people and to be able to support those type of nonprofits is huge, to that there's somebody out there trying to do something to help in that area. And, I don't ever want it to come across like, okay, yeah, we are a business networking group. That is really what we are. The support is kind of a byproduct of it.
Yeah.
But I think that's huge. I mean, I think a lot of military people are great entrepreneurs because they have discipline and they work hard and they learned how to focus and a lot of the things that they've learned through the military. And sometimes it's hard transitioning into the civilian world and to the different, like my son that's one of the reasons I think he actually re-enlisted is because he was like, I don't know how it will be working in the civilian world. I'm just so used to us being able to like joke with each other and tease with each other. And then there's not all these, you don't have to worry about HR being called and that sort of thing. They're rough and they're tough. Yeah. A lot of times people coming out of the military do better by starting their own businesses.
Well, I can relate because one of the, as you're sharing your story, I think as I'm recalling this, one of our podcast guests as well, the servicemen from the firefighters and police officers goes through the same stress when it's their retirement period. It's because their whole career, and most of them stay in their career for 10 years plus. One of our guests shared the story that one of the fire chief who served about 20 plus years as a chief. Actually, this isn't a fire chief, a police officer. On his retirement, he didn't know what he was going to do, and instead of having retirement, it became a memorial because he committed suicide because he didn't know how he's going to adjust after his years of service, and this is a very is real struggle to many retirees because they don't know. But for the military, at a young age, they get out of service after what, 10 years, times sometimes 6, sometimes 10, but you're only what, 30 plus. That's a young age. That's it's so difficult at that time.
Yeah, my youngest son, he served 4 years straight out of high school, so he was 23 when he got out, I believe, and thankfully he did. He went through a little bit of a transition period, but he went into the reserves for a little bit. He and now he works on solar panels and windmills. So, but see, there again, I have to worry. Like, he's not on the battlefield, but I know of a lady whose son died from falling from a tower, so, we just have to trust God to keep our kids safe. And, but yeah, no, it definitely, he went through a transition period there though, until he found his purpose of doing this new kind of job and making really good money now. And I wish that anybody listening to this, if they have a small business, that they will really strongly consider hiring a veteran, especially coming straight out of the military.
Angela, the work that you're doing, especially with the veterans, can you tell us a little bit about what the mistakes that you often see they typically don't understand when it comes to financial wellness, or even if it's not the veterans, but for the older adults that are needing to understand financial wellness, that they're not typically prepared when they realize, oh my goodness, I'm not prepared at this stage of life. I'm 65, 70, aging is expensive. What are those common mistakes that you've been seeing that people should be aware and they should be doing?
Well, I think I know one of the mistakes I made when I was younger was thinking, oh, that retirement, that's something older people have to think about. And it's not. It's not only something that young people need to think about, but parents need to be thinking about setting up for their own children's retirement. That's one of the things that I do is, we have like $1 million baby plans and things like that. Also, the reason I added Legal Shield as one of my services is because people need to get their wills done. People die young. And my first husband died he was 32 years old. And we didn't think we needed a will, but he was, from the last time he went in the hospital, well, he had almost died 2 years before, and we just thought it was a one-off thing. He was getting better, and then 2 years later, he got sick again and ended up dying within like 5 to 6 days from heart issues, and and he was really young for that to happen, and so we didn't have a will. And that was a really hard thing to be like, hey, we need to have you sign these papers while he's on his deathbed. Like, you don't want to have to think about those things. And, it's a weird thing, but like I talk to my kids about, hey, y'all need to get wills done. And then I sound like I'm really morbid, but it's like leaving the very final last love letter to your family. People always talk about, people who take their lives leaving suicide notes, and it just seems so cruel and so mean. Whereas like a will is the complete opposite of that. It's like you prepared, you thought about your family, and you thought about, because thing either happened unexpectedly or, but I think that was one of the main things, is that we just think we're going to live forever, and we don't. I mean, even if people just get like a term life insurance policy, if nothing else, just so their family can bury them. My son, he didn't have life insurance when he died. We looked everywhere for a policy. At the time, it was, the family pulled together and made everything happen. He didn't have any children that he left behind, so we didn't have to worry about that. That's a double-edged thing there, because it would have been amazing to have a child of his left behind. But now I'm always telling my kids, get your wills done. I think when I did credit repair, people really need to educate themselves about credit, because people have a lot of misconceptions, and they think, oh, well, I need to get out of debt before start worrying about retirement or any of that kind of stuff. And they'll take their money out of their 401ks. That's a terrible mistake, because things that will end up reporting to your credit, say, for instance, I would never tell anybody don't pay a bill or don't pay a debt. Anything that's going to report to your credit is going to be written off by the company, and it's also going to fall off of your credit in 7 years. Well, an investment in your future, in 7 years, the compound interest will continue to grow. And the older you get, the more chance there is of something happening to you, your health. And you could get to the point where you're not able even to get insurance because of your health issues. And so there's a lot of strategies that can be attached to life insurance where you end up saving a lot of money on your taxes. And you can't get those because you waited too long. And so I would say that's another thing. Also, people not understanding, they think, oh, I need to pay off my vehicle to improve my credit score. That actually hurts your credit score. And, they want you to have installment credit showing on your credit. They want you to have different kinds of credit. There's just a lot of things like that. I do free credit consultations with people because that's where I see a lot of misconceptions. And that's where a lot of people, it's like this big looming dark cloud over their life. And to be able to lift some of those misconceptions off of them and to be able to help them to actually start preparing for their future, I'm happy to do that. Those are some of the things that pop in my head right off the bat.
There's a lot of richness there, especially that when you look at it from a normal, these are things that are not taught anywhere typically. And,
they're not taught in high school. It's not taught in college. It's not taught in the military. Well, I will say my boys did have some of their superior officers in the military who encouraged them to get their finances in order and that sort of thing. I was very thankful for that. I don't know if that's with all branches, but I do know in the Marines that was a big thing. But still, even then, I feel like there was a lot of misinformation, and people need to educate themselves. And we do that. Like we lead with financial education because, you can tell somebody what they need to do, but if they don't understand why they're doing it, it's like if you go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes something, we just so trust that doctor, but it was getting to the point anymore where I want a little bit of an explanation. Like, what are you giving me? Okay, it's a steroid. What? Okay, so, or, oh, it's an antibiotic. And we need to understand why we're doing what we're doing and how to prioritize things.
Well, based on what you've experienced, if you just give a ratio, especially you typically work with a lot of older adults. How much of the older adults you typically are completely aware of what you just shared, and how much of them are needing help when you engage with them?
I try really hard to reach the younger people, younger families, but I do deal a lot with older people because of there's a lot of older veterans like in the networking group that I'm in. But I also realize that older people have children and grandchildren that one of the reasons why the financial education company that I work with is called Wealth Wave is because there's this huge wave coming of baby boomers leaving money behind to the Gen Xers, and the Gen Xers leaving their money to the millennials, and nobody knows what to do. And there's all these, most of the financial professionals out there are aging out. There's a huge lack of people to help people that, well, a lot of times people don't want to have to pay for it. So, like, we don't charge for our services, so we're able to help more families. Yeah, I mean, the older people, I think, need to realize that they need to lend their voice to teach the younger people. And if they haven't prepared, so about a couple of years ago, I went to a webinar that was presented by a lady named Kim Scholar, who was the co-author with a lady named Sharon Lecter. She was with the Rich Dad Poor Dad. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Anyways, these two ladies got together and wrote How Money Works for Women, Take Control or Lose It. It was a sequel to a book written called How Money Works, Stop Being a Sucker. And these are the books that we use to teach people financial education. But this presentation, and through the book, I mean, the books are written at like a 5th grade level. So there's like literally no reason that people can't be learning this. Most of the books can be read in just a very short time, and they're packed full of information. And I do teach some classes as well. But this presentation that I went to, she describes the different characters in the book, and they kind of illustrate through the lives of these characters different situations that people find themselves in, women find themselves in, related to finances. And I related to a lot of them. One of the biggest things being that I didn't have a retirement plan, because in the heavy equipment business that my ex-husband and I had, our plan was to build up our inventory to the point that when we got too sick and too old to work, we would, sell off our inventory, and we'd have those millions of dollars to retire on. And through the divorce, that kind of imploded, as divorces tend to do with most businesses that are, family owned. But so at the end of this presentation, I was so discouraged. I was just like, it's like, yeah, I relate to that lady and that lady and that lady at all these different stages of my life. And at the end, she says, well, if you find yourself discouraged, she said, don't be, because you can take the mistakes and things that you lived through, and you can learn the right way to do things, and you can turn around and teach other people not to make those same mistakes. And so through that, like I have mentors and people who are helping me. I have like a 10-year plan where I'm going to be good. I'm going to be fine. So I'm thankful that there's kind of like that plan Z for me. But I don't want other people to end up there. That's why, if I talk to older people who've already got everything in order, it's like, look, this isn't where it ends. Like, people who need this. People who need financial education. And, there's just some, like here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have probably, I don't know, like 3 million people probably. And, maybe 12% of them are seeing somebody already, but a lot of those companies, you have to have at least $1 million to walk in the door. 80% of people don't have that. You got the bottom, maybe 8% who are living hand to mouth, living on, welfare, food stamps and things like that. But those 80% in the middle are the people I try to reach. And there's just one me. So I'm actually trying to build a team of people to help me to get out there and help people, learn these things and get things in place, get their life insurance in place, get their, make sure their 401ks are working for them. If they have, a lot of people don't even realize if they leave a company, they have a 401k sitting there. It's like leaving money in your ex's bank account. Like, who would do that? Right. So, just a lot of just very practical, easy things. It didn't cost people anything, to do these things.
You can't, like, I think as I'm listening to your story, Angela, I've known you for quite some time, for the short amount of time that talked multiple times. You have a huge theme of resilience in life. As you're telling us your story, something that comes to me all the time is you can't control everything in life, what life brings, but you always have something that you pull out from that life experience. You always come out with a greater perspective, and you have a lot of and you bring that to the next venture. You always bring it to the next stage of your life, which is beautiful. It's this accumulation of experience, this knowledge that you're bringing to the world, and again, a lot of the, from as a veteran mom, divorce, as business, it's a huge.
I have to say, I want to give my parents a lot of credit.
Yeah.
Because my mom was very practical and everything, but yet she always said, you got to take lemons. If you get lemons, you make lemonade out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was very much of a positive thinker. He was always, you can do whatever you want in your life. Like, you just got to set your mind to it. And, so I had a lot of very positive upbringing. So I'm very thankful for that. And I, first and foremost, I thank God, because he came into my life. And if I didn't have that, looking back over the things that I've been through, to be able to turn to God and to have him pour out his grace and his supernatural mercy and strength on me and through me during those times, I couldn't have gotten through it. And I don't know how people do, actually. I don't know how they get through those things.
Yeah, I just kind of want to piggyback off of what Adam was saying, that, hearing your story, you have such a defined purpose, and many different purposes, and you've established different communities of support along the way. And I think we just need more people like you who bring such positivity and wanting to help other people in different ways. So thank you for sharing so much of your story. And yeah, I agree that I think we're not educated about finances. So that needs to be brought into schools.
I got so excited when I met Adam with PrimeSpan and what you all are doing. It's a positive thing, and you're helping people. And one of the main things I love to do is connect people to help other people. Like, because I can't do it all myself, and I don't have expertise in all these areas. But if we all connect with each other, and refer people to one another and help one another to grow. I mean, in the end, it's going to end up being a better world in the end. So let's hope.
Correct. Well, I think this is also why we're aligned, as you and I were talking about this. Our goal is to help older adults live better longer, and we have the same mission, is to just spread that, to be help to each other. And when you and I connected, I just wanted to help amplify the mission that you're doing, because it's such a beautiful thing that you're trying to help more people. And if we can help you reach more people through what we're able to provide as a platform, and share the message that you have, because such a beautiful message through the vulnerability, through the experience in life. There's so many people who can connect through everything that you just shared, Angela. And for us, it's I think this is one of those. We could go in many, many more conversations in many more angles. I could say this is one of the part one conversation. This is an introduction to Angela and what she's all about. I hope that this could be we can have multiple conversations. I have many things in mind, but I know we can go on and on and on and on in this. But this is for our listeners. I hope that for those of you that are listening, you can relate to what Angela shared through her life experience, through her mission, and that you can go through life and all the challenges, but you can come out of it strong, but still and help more people through it. and be a light to many more people because of what you've experienced in life. And that's really what Angela has shared with us here. Allyson, do you want to add anything for our listeners before we have Angela share anything that she want to add before we end our conversation for today?
Yes, thank you, Adam. So, for all of our listeners out there, you're probably listening to our podcast right now on Apple, Spotify, Substack, or YouTube. So, thank you so much for listening in on us. We also have our core membership we have available and our coaching membership called Build, which is a more supportive environment for our members to have one-on-one coaching throughout the month. So those are our two current offerings. And coming up soon, we're going to be launching our Be Here for My Future campaign, which is inspired by our interns and our parents, our loved ones in our life, that we want them to be here for our future. So stay tuned for that upcoming campaign. And thank you for following us on all of our social media platforms at primespan.life.
Thank you, Allyson. Angela, anything before we close our conversation, anything you want to share with our listeners?
Well, just that I consider myself in that older age range. I'm six. I just turned 60, and so I believe that it's never too late to dream and to have hope for the future. And I'm just so happy to be able to connect with people out there who might be hearing this. This is awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for being with us, Angela. And again, thank you for your time today. And we appreciate everything that you do to the community and to the people that you serve.
Thank you for spending time with us. If today's conversation gave you clarity or steadiness, take that with you. We release new episodes weekly. Follow the PrimeSpan Podcast on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss what's next. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep living well.